Thank you so much. So if we're ready, I'll get started. Okay, so I think your theme for this month is rhythm, right? So I wanted to speak a little bit about human emotions, and specifically decoding the language of emotions, which is something that as we go on, you'll understand better what that means. Now, we tend to, if we look at the science behind, so scientific reasoning tries to look at literally every phenomenon and see why it exists, what's the purpose for it. And if we look at emotions, right, science talks about, well, what is the purpose of emotions, all right? So you ask questions about everything. And so if anyone wants to volunteer, like if I ask you, what is the purpose of emotions? Or what do emotions tell you? What do your own emotions tell you? What would you say? Yeah? To express yourself. What else? So if I just hone in a little, if we talk a little about uncomfortable emotions, what do you think those are saying to you? Okay, yes. What else? Okay, all right. So the uncomfortable emotion, just like you have a fever, right, is telling you that something's not right, some need is unmet, and that you must fulfill that need, all right? But what's the kind of relationship that we have with our emotions normally? And again, I'm speaking about uncomfortable emotions, which I will describe to you in a bit which ones they are, right? So the idea is that, you want to, usually our response is we distract, we don't like the feeling, so we'll do something else that makes us feel better, right? And so, in other words, we put a shield over, and we're not really resolving the issue, which this tends to be a very common take. It's very interesting that when it comes to emotions, human beings are very strange, have a very strange relationship with our emotions. So if there's a lot of anger I feel, many times the way I'm gonna try to dissipate that anger, either I can't handle it and I shut it down. I can't face this, I can't face what's happening and I shut it down and I deflect, or I, act as though nothing happened. Or then I say that unless I act in this anger in the exact intensity that I feel it, right, it's not gonna go away. And so what happens? And we end up in anger management class, right? So we end up having to learn how to deal with our anger. So it's a very strange kind of relationship we tend to have. So I want to speak a little bit about these uncomfortable emotions we have and why it's important to address these. Personally, the kind of take I have towards therapy is that we need to be careful not to over-therapize, which is not really a word, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? Sometimes we look at some things and we go a little too deep, right, when it comes to even self-awareness. And so even when I'm teaching, I find that I have to, whilst I'm sharing all the knowledge, getting into the nitty-gritties, but then also pulling my students back and saying, we get there where we really feel that there is a problem. So that's something that's important to be aware of as well before we move forward. But I want to talk a little bit about repressed emotions, all right? So sometimes what happens is that we sometimes have some negative experiences, some unfortunate experiences that we may have had in our past. If you don't get closure, what happens is that you carry those emotions with you, all right? So something like maybe intense levels of grief. And of course, what we're most familiar with is anger, right? So something happened to you maybe even 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, but you carry the anger. Now, why is this problematic? It's problematic because you are now living through that anger. And what you don't realize is there's a lot you might be missing out on in life, even if it's just in terms of joy. right? And not something material, which is usually our, standard. We can be missing out on so much simply because now we are looking at things through that lens of anger and the beliefs that that generates, right? The world hates me, the world is a bad place, people are mistrustful, people are evil, I can't trust anyone, I can't do anything right. These are some of the things that many of us find ourselves believing and feeling, and we tend to live life with these, what we call limiting beliefs. Why is this problematic? Because you must have heard of the term self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens is that if there's anything good that comes your way, anything that would make your life more meaningful, because you believe that I'm not good enough, this is not for me, you're not even going to allow it to enter. So that's why it's important to deal with some repressed emotions. Now, this doesn't mean that you look back at some past negative event that you just got over, you've moved on from, and you go back and you try to generate those emotions again, right? So again, we don't want to overly therapize things, okay? But this is for those people who find themselves specifically stuck, those people who feel that I am actually stuck. Something happened to me before. This is how I feel. I'm always really angry. I'm always afraid. And I just can't seem to move on. So this is especially for those people. Now, we have this thing called primary emotions. And I'm going to sort of take you through the cycle of what happens, how we end up from maybe feeling a bit of anger towards something, and how that can sort of permeate into a cycle that ends in depression. So I'm going to talk about that, but before that, can anyone tell me what some primary emotions are? What do I mean by primary emotions? Okay. Let's talk about some uncomfortable emotions. Okay, fear. What else? Anger, yeah? Anxiety, okay. What else? What are some primary negative emotions? Anger, yes. Okay, okay. Not entirely a primary emotion, but grief, sadness. So the 5 main emotions that we work on are anger, sadness, guilt, a sense of betrayal or loneliness, and fear. Betrayal being literally the mother of all negative emotions. Human beings find it very, very difficult to deal with betrayal and to move on from that. There's a few more as well. A sense of inadequacy, a sense of boredom. These are all primary negative emotions that we experience. Or, uncomfortable emotions. They become negative if left unresolved and if leading to certain behaviors that are problematic. So what happens? When you begin to feel, let's take something like anger. Or in fact, you guys tell me, I'm going to give you some statements and you tell me. Now we want to understand what we're feeling, because here's one thing that happens that we don't really know. We can be feeling really bad, but we're not always familiar with what exactly the emotion is. How do you resolve an issue? By first knowing there's an issue in the first place and being able to identify, right? So if I say that everyone's really unfair to me, something very bad has happened to me, it shouldn't have happened. In terms of emotions, what really am I saying? What is the emotion here? Yeah? No. It's the one you're talking about the most. The one that I'm talking about the most. Anger. Anger is a feeling of injustice. So if you find yourself, or maybe even a friend, maybe it's not so much a problem for you, but maybe even a friend who's constantly saying, life is unfair, the world is unfair, what happened to me shouldn't have happened, it was a bad thing to happen. In essence, that's repressed anger, even though it may not look like rage.
Sometimes we even tend to think better for other people, but then that doesn't go along. When you do better for other people, you're gonna get hate as well.
Yeah.
So how about
Yeah.
that?
So that would be perhaps a mix of betrayal and anger, right? So we experience these together as well. So you see, so I spoke about anger, and you're now learning that this is what anger means. So it's very interesting. There was this, I think, American female athlete once. I think she was a runner, and she was charged with having substances in her system, in her bloodstream, and and as such, she was, I don't know, some kind of suspension, some kind of ban. And she comes on, I mean, these are so universal. She comes on, she's giving a press conference, and she stands there and she says, I am so saddened by these allegations. So, body language experts and people who can see through and be able to tell, who's telling the truth and who's telling lies. I mean, these are people who are employed by your investigation sort of agencies. Right away, they picked on this, and what did they say? That she's not telling the truth. Why? Because if someone's accused you of something you haven't done, you don't feel sadness. I mean, it could be a mix, but the main thing that you feel is anger. She should be angry, right? And that's how they sort of picked on it, and it really did turn out that she was, so it's not really easy to tell a lie, especially in front of the experts, right? So if I say to you that I really don't know what's going to happen next, I'm not sure what's going to happen, and what kind of emotion am I expressing over there? What if this happens? What if that happens? That's fear. That's anxiety. Anxiety is an attenuated form of fear, right? If I say, I shouldn't have done this, I wish I could be of more help. This is something that collectively people are feeling these days. What is that? That's guilt. And a sense of regret, yeah, it comes in. There's a sense of guilt, right, which collectively a lot of people are feeling these days as well because of world events, right? So if I say to you, I'm worthless, I can't do this, what is that? Inadequacy. Okay? So important to understand the language of emotions. Anger especially is a sense, and we'll be focusing on anger because it's the one that's most talked about. Anger especially is a sense of injustice. Okay? Now, also remember that your emotions and your perception or your interpretation of events are tied together very strongly. So how you interpret things that happen will also determine the kind of emotion that you have. So if I meet a friend and I feel like they didn't really meet me as enthusiastically as they normally do, and if I say that, and if I decide that, well, that's because I'm good for nothing and, she just doesn't care anymore, what kind of emotion is that going to generate? It's obviously I'm not going to feel good about it. If I turn around and say, oh, she's just really exhausted, I know that, she's had a really tough day today and she's just really exhausted, I can reasonably expect not to feel bad after that, okay? So the interpretations that you give are incredibly important determinants in the kind of emotions that you feel. And here's another thing. Sometimes just because you're thinking something or feeling something doesn't mean you're right. So many times we say, if I'm feeling bad about it, if I'm not feeling good about something, then, I must be right. If this person makes me feel this way, then I must be right about them. You want to be careful about that. You want to look back at the lens through which you're looking at things. Because if you have had some kind of maybe very strong negative experience in your life that shaped your belief system in a negative way and you become very pessimistic, then you're going to look at things with that lens. And so you must have heard people say, don't believe everything you think, right? So that's an important one as well. You really want to get in there. And look, this is especially for people who find themselves on the wrong end of the spectrum each time, right? That they make certain interpretations that most people around them are thinking, you know, where did you come up with that from? So if you feel like you're someone like that, that's something you need to work on. And the same thing applies then for the feelings and the emotions that you have as well. Now, generally, how does this happen, this whole pattern of feeling bad about something, not really addressing the need, and then ending up in a place where you feel entirely hopeless, where your depression kicks in? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I also want to talk about some questions that you can ask yourself. So some self-coaching that you can do, all right, to help yourself before you get to that point. So something happens, let's say, in fact, I'll give you an example of this client I once worked with. So his problem was that he kept experiencing multiple back-to-back job losses, right? So he would be asked to leave his company, asked to resign wherever he would work. Now, it started off with like feeling bad. What happens when something like that happens? You feel bad, right? And when you feel bad about something, what's usually one of the first things you're going to do? Okay, but what are you going to do normally? Yeah, okay. What are you going to do then? Play victim? You're going to distract. This is like our best friend. Distracting ourselves is literally like our best friend now, whether it's scrolling on the phone, whether it's, you know, no, I'm just going to go watch a movie. And look, sometimes distractions are good. It's fine. But sometimes the problem is a little more serious, right? And why do we do this? Because we find it difficult to face the truth. So this particular individual loses his job, gets very angry, right? So that's him feeling bad, right? Which is, you can put in any emotion over there. Gets really, really angry and decides to distract from the actual problem. Well, why is it that you know, can we get into that? Well, you know, the boss is really bad, the company is doing really bad. These are some common examples. And these things happen too, by the way, you know. So, but I'm just giving you a particular example. So you will tend to distract with these, and then of course you'll, you know. So this person then continues and says, okay, I will apply for another job, okay? Now I'm going to come back to you and tell you exactly what these feelings mean, except that we tend not to address the problem, okay? And he had a very particular problem that was occurring at work, which I'll tell you in a while. So you start distracting, okay? And then what does he do? He says, of course, he has to apply for another job. He applies for another job, and he gets it. Sometime down the line, he's now beginning to feel as though the same thing is happening again. Bosses are not happy. Things maybe aren't getting done. And I'm unable to get out of this rut. I'm constantly finding myself in this position where I'm either looking for a job or I'm afraid that I'll lose my job. What do you think kicks, this is like the primary emotion over here, the anger that he's feeling. What do you think kicks in next? And this is what we would call a secondary emotion. Okay. What else? Okay. No, depression comes later. Frustration. You're doing something again and again, it's not working. You end up with the same result that you're trying to avoid. Okay? So he keeps trying, you know, and then maybe he moves on to another organization as well and says, you know, this time is going to be different. Same thing begins to happen. They're unhappy with him. And then maybe he makes conclusions about, you know, it's just the country, you know, it's a problem with the people in the country. You know, these are some kind of things that, you know. So you continue, and then this happens too. You're distracting from the actual problem. Let me just get into this and see why this is happening. This is like perhaps the most terrifying thing for people to do. But it's not preventing you from any of the pain. It's like choosing the pain. Either sit down and accept, what the real problem is, or then continue this way, right? So when clients come to us and say, well, all this stuff in therapy is leading to more, and why do I need to change, and it's difficult. Well, you're choosing now between two hardships, between what's already there, that's driving you insane, and doing the work. That's also a little difficult, but it's a means to an end, right? It's a means to getting out of this rut. Okay, so it comes down to the decisions that you make, but many times we don't see it that way. So we'll, again, distract and then get frustrated, distract and then get frustrated. And then here's a point where usually people show up. This is usually when they show up for therapy. They've almost had a breakdown. This is where it's like, the hell with it. I'm not going to do anything. It is what it is. I don't care. And this is a difficult place to be in, because let's say if they have families and they lose their jobs, and now they're sitting there saying, don't care, because nothing works. Now, when you're in this state of depression, usually within a few days, it's sort of that you have this burst of energy that kicks in again, that makes you want to do well, and gives you that motivation. But motivation alone isn't enough. So you keep doing the same thing, and it keeps feeding into this. The frustration kicks in again because it's not working, and then you feel depressed, and then the frustration kicks in because now you've tried to do something about it, but it's not working. All right? And so there's just something not right with me. The world isn't for people like me. Okay? That's what kicks in. So with this particular, and at this point, this is like the end point. So anytime anyone, and for those who are practicing therapists over here, anyone who comes to you saying that they're depressed or in this state where nothing seems, this is like a massive existential crisis. Nothing's working for me. I try so hard, but nothing's working for me. These are very, very difficult emotions to have to carry. And sometimes we see a very strong link that sometimes this is a point where you might even see passive suicidal ideation, right? Which is something like, I don't even want to live in this world anymore, all right? So it's dangerous. But you should know that something has happened before, you see? In many cases, of course not in all, right? And where depression isn't caused by some very heavy biological factors, when we're looking at psychosocial factors, usually something is happening over here. Now, this particular individual was very avoidant when it came to their work, okay? Problem was so small. He laughed. He laughed and then he was angry that the problem was this small, because he allowed himself to go through all this. It was just that he wouldn't focus on the work that was given to him. But he had some really amazing ideas, right? So all the peripheral stuff, he would start, working on that, come up with new projects and go after agencies. But he wouldn't get the actual important work assigned to him done, which is why he kept having trouble at work, which is why his bosses were never satisfied with him. So can you see that? Sometimes it's something that small, and we don't confront it over here. It's too much for us to bear, right? Yes, you are doing something wrong, right? And okay, it is your fault, but it's not something that can't be fixed, right? And we see this many times. People come in for career counseling or even like relationship counseling. Sometimes it's the small things that you do. Because if it's the big things, then everyone knows about it, right? Everyone knows, and you know about it too. So if you find yourself in a cycle like this, look back, talk to people who know you, ask them, speak to them. Try to be a little humble, you know. Let them tell you, because it's going to save you from a lot of, because once you hit this point, it's difficult. You know, people do it, but it's difficult to come out of it at that point. And then you know, have feelings of regret for the time wasted, all right? Now, what are some of the things in this process? Again, I spoke to you about the language of emotions, all right? So in this process, when the anger kicks in, what did he want to do at that time? What are some questions he should have asked himself when he lost his first job and he was really angry? What do you guys think? Okay, good. Why am I feeling this anger? Why I lost my job? What was the cause of this? Okay? And then to be able to be open about it. What was the cause of this event happening? Is my anger at other people justified? Right? And in this case, it wasn't. You see? By the way, what does frustration mean? What is frustration saying to people? Any psychology majors over here? When a person is feeling frustrated, so anger is saying something unjust has happened to me. What is frustration saying to you? Yeah? Okay, but in terms of asking you to do something, what is it doing? Yes, but there's a little more to it. Frustration is a call to action. But what kind of action? Anyone? Yeah? No, hopefully not. Hopefully not. It could lead to that. But what is, in essence, what is frustration telling you? That's why it's important to understand the language of emotions. Your frustration is telling you, it's calling you to act, but it's asking you to act differently. Do something different. Ever heard the saying, I think it's Salvador Dali, madness is to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I don't know if it's Dali, but so you're doing the same thing over and over. You're not getting in and saying, well, why is this happening? How can I do this differently? You're just doing the same thing over and over, each time taking your anger, your rage, your repressed, unresolved anger into the next situation, doing the same thing over and over, ending up with the same results. So frustration is always telling you to do something different. So if you find yourselves, maybe any initiative, you know, even in a relationship, you're trying to resolve issues and you try to resolve them in the same way and it never works, right? Ask yourself, what could I be doing differently? What am I reading wrong? And how could I do this different? And usually, the bulk of therapy is just this. Just looking at options, how to deal with a problem in a different manner. Sometimes people will laugh, you know, and it's good, you know, because it's an instant release and they realize, oh my gosh, for sometimes 10, 20, 30 entire lives, you know, 10, 20, 30 years, and sometimes for our entire lives, we do the exact same thing, expecting something different to happen, and each time, you know, we're met with the same unsatisfactory results. So important to understand what these emotions mean. Gotta do something differently. Maybe he's not even suited to that particular environment. Take a different course of action, or own the mistakes that you make. What is depression saying to you now? So when the depression kicks in and you feel like, I can't do this anymore, in essence, what should you be doing at that point? Okay, yeah. This is a very high level of stress now that is unmanageable for you. What do you do at that point? You ask for help or you take a break. Depression is telling you, hold on now, right? That's what it's saying. Take a break, step back, reach out to someone, right? Try to get a different perspective. That's what it's saying. So when you find these feelings, and it's going to feel like, exactly like, you know, to hell with everything, I'm not going to do anything now. That's it. you know. And then if you're familiar with symptoms of depression, right? You don't feel like doing anything that much or sleeping too less. These are from amongst the symptoms of depression. And you know, the thing with depression is you know it when you're feeling it, you see. So the idea is to take a break and then come back refreshed and take action. But this time, do something different. Identify your mistakes, identify where you were going wrong, and do something different now. Okay? So that can save a person from having to go through this entire cycle if you catch it in time. All right? So some of this is unnecessary stuff. It's about asking the right questions and also being willing. Look, if you're already suffering in life, you know, asking yourself some difficult questions is the same thing, except that it's going to lead to a solution. Okay? So that's one of the processes that I wanted to speak to you about. Now, how do you do some self-coaching, right? So let's try to be a little as independent as we can be. If you find yourself at a point where you really can't break through, just talking to someone isn't helping, maybe doing your own brainstorming isn't helping, you're just really, really depressed, you really feel like you have no energy, no motivation, that would be a good time to reach out to a professional. But we want to look at things that we can do for ourselves as well, right? And so that's why you guys have been handed out your, I don't know, sticky notes. And so just a series of questions that you can ask yourself. And this time we're going to start with an emotion. We're going to talk about anger. Okay? So, how much? Okay, so quickly. So you guys can take your sticky notes, whoever wants to, or you can make a mental note of things. I want you to identify, now first of all, I mean, I can't do this with all the emotions, so I've picked up anger. First of all, is there something that you feel incredibly angry about, that you feel it holds you back? Has something happened for you? If it has, then this exercise is especially for you, right? So what would be, you can write down or make a mental note, what is the cause of that anger? So it's important, number one, we identify the feeling. What is the language that you're using? It's unfair, or I'm really good for nothing. That helps you first identify what is the language that you use to describe yourself. That's going to help you understand how much anger you're feeling, okay? Or whatever emotion it is. But we're sticking to anger. First thing you want to ask yourself, what is the cause? So if you can identify the cause, what happened that led you to feel angry? Okay? So if someone's doing it, I'll just wait a little. And you can just, I mean, you don't have to write really long, and I'm not going to ask you to share it either, okay? So it stays your thing. What was the cause? And now we want to move towards a response, an adequate response, right? So number one, always, especially if you find yourself someone who is given to feeling this negative emotion a lot, ask yourself, do a reality check. Is it justified for me to feel this way? Can I look at this situation in another way? Is there another way I can interpret this? Maybe if I'm really angry again at losing a job, maybe the entire department was let go. So instead of taking it as something very personal and again concluding I can't do anything, you see, it's a whole maybe company-wide thing, right? And so can I look at this in a different way? Not lie to yourself, but is there a different way of looking at it as opposed to, you know, making these really damning conclusions about myself? Now the next two things, or the last one especially, is a little difficult, but the next thing is, if you still decide that no, this situation is unfair, okay, because yes, some things that happen that are actually unfair, regardless of the kind of interpretation you're giving it, what can I do to make it fair? Is that possible? Can I make this fair somehow? Right? So sometimes when people, that's what your justice system is for. You reach out to the justice system because you've been wronged. And you reach out to other people to help you fix this. All right? What if it's so reprehensible, whatever has happened? There's no other way to look at it, right? So this can involve even cases of abuse, maybe loss of life, maybe someone, lost someone very close to them, and maybe it was a deliberate act, someone murdered them, let's say. Well, here's a tough one then, which I'm not going to ask you to do right now. But you can ask yourself, can I do this or not? Which is, can I forgive? You see? So it's a tough one. People don't really like this. But sometimes when you're living, quite literally living the pain of something really bad that's happened, because life is more than just losing your job or just a friend mistreating you. There are some very reprehensible things that happen. And if you've lived way too long carrying that with you, carrying that anger with you, that you haven't been able to move forward, the idea of forgiveness is not to release the other person or the perpetrator from any blame, but to release yourself from the shackles that it has over you. And that's a process where, again, that's not going to happen with just the exercise we're doing over here. That's a process where if a person finds themselves, maybe I want to do this, or I want to explore this, and I've lived and I've, in my practice, I've seen people bring the most horrendous stories, and they come and they're ready to let go, and their lives change dramatically. Not because now we've decided what happened wasn't so bad, but now we've decided that what happened no longer has a hold over you. It happened, it was bad, it no longer has a hold over me. And so that's where forgiveness works. And usually this involves hypnotherapy, this involves things like timeline therapy, and takes some time to do, all right? But just to give you an idea of how usually with most things that happen to us, at the reality checkpoint, and even at the second point, how can I fix this? You see, that's also something we don't do. Someone might be mistreating us, someone might be mean to us. We don't address the problem. That's a problem that can be fixed. You can speak to them and you can resolve it that way. All right? So here's just a bit of an introduction. There's a lot more to this. We've spoken mainly just about anger, but just to give you a little bit about trying to understand what it is that you're feeling. What is that feeling saying to you? When you understand that, then you can solve the problem, okay? And then there's a range of options for all kinds of different things that happen to us or that we do ourselves.